So I'm Jamie Allen. I used to work at TypeSafe Lightbend for about 4.5 years. I've been a Scala developer for over 10. I am the author of Effective Akka and co-author of Reactive Design Patterns. So one of the things that I love about technical conferences is we come to these places and we see people talk about all these really cool things you can do with technology. It's amazing. The kinds of implementations people build, the innovative ways they approach problems, it's all very exciting. But one thing we never talk about is how to be successful in building a team that's actually going to implement these concerns. And I think that that's super important because as you go back to your companies and you think you want to do something, you'll also have to affect change with the organization. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to structure teams to be successful in building reactive applications? That's what this talk is about. I'm currently working at Facebook. Facebook is a very unique place. Many people have heard our axiom that we move fast and break things. A couple of years ago, people figured out that wasn't such a great idea. Because when you're operating at scale and people are building core, critical infrastructure with that kind of mindset, and they're not incentivized around building tests or focusing on the reliability of the system, well, things aren't going to be pretty. So the mantra changed, and it became move fast with stable infra. And that is literally what we say inside of Facebook now. So I work on an infrastructure team. It's called Shard Manager. I know that sounds really exciting and, I don't know, innovative, and just, I don't know, it's got a certain je ne sais quoi. But at least it's not called Atlas, so I feel good about that. We all know what reactive is. The idea that we're going to build message-driven systems that will enable us to be resilient and elastic and therefore responsive to our users. That's the core of the Reactive Manifesto that Jonas and others crafted back in 2014 or 2013. I believe there's over 26,000 people who've signed it now. It's really important to us as developers that we focus on building software that's going to meet these critical criteria. But who advocates for it? Who on your team is the person saying how we're going to follow up on being resilient? What success in resilience actually is? And we're going to prove it. Who's going to sign off on all that? Is it going to be, the developers? Probably not. That would be almost asking the cat to mind the bird cage. Not because we're bad people or anything like that, but let's face it, we are focused on the development of software. We aren't necessarily focused on the success criteria. And management may not be the best people to do it because, let's face it, they're focused on managing the project and having meetings and making sure that everybody in the organization is on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish. It's an important role. And the product owners, they typically are focused in the domain. So they're thinking about if you're building a payment system, how credit card transactions are going to occur, what the result of them are going to be, but they may not be the people who have the skill set or ability to focus on resilience and elasticity and how you're going to measure that and actually prove success. So somebody's got to do it. Who's that person going to be? Anybody ever heard of Conways Law? This is the idea that organizations that are building systems typically organize themselves in a way that, is representative of their own communication structures. And if those communication structures represent a very hierarchical organization, well, believe it or not, the systems are going to be very hierarchical in nature as well. If we can think about building software in a different way, maybe we can also think about organizing ourselves in a different way as well. If we do not, we end up in a world of technical debt. And when that happens, everything goes bad. We end up with all this stuff that's just falling over all over the place. And it can be incredibly painful as an organization because you say, hey, yeah, we're going to build resilient systems. We're going to be this elastic, auto-scaling thing. But nobody was really advocating for it. Nobody was signing off on those concerns. They just expect that this is going to happen automatically because you're using the right technologies or something. The technologies are critical to doing so, but you still need to have somebody advocating on its behalf. We need reactive product owners. Reactive product owners are people who are going to focus on our non-functional concerns. Not the domain, not the fact that we're building a payment system per se, but on the actual resilience and on the elasticity and all the concerns around non-functional things. Is anybody here a product owner? Nobody. Well, then I guess I may as well stop. But no, it's, believe it or not, in a lot of ways we all are. It is important that we think in terms of building a product. It is critical that we think in terms of building something that is going to be useful for our users. And build out the stories around that, right? We see people talking about epics and stories and user stories and whatnot. And somebody has to be responsible for that on your team. Yes, I know Confluence and Jira and tools like that are awfully painful to use. But what else do we have? And how else are you going to build systems and explain what they are? Somebody's got to write up what our requirements are and how we're going to follow through on them. So a product owner in general, they advocate for the implementation. They define requirements. They figure out how we prioritize the work so we know what we're going to do first and what we're going to deliver when. And then they sign off and say, yes, this is what we said it would be. Does that mean it has to be perfect? No. I mean, I'm sure sometimes you sign off on something and later on you find a bug. But it does mean that you feel like you have reached a point where you have, met the critical requirement. And sometimes this can be particularly tricky. A reactive product owner is thinking about this in non-functional terms. And it's the exact same list, basically, aside from the very first thing where they're advocating for those non-functional concerns. Think about this. If we are going to say that our system has a hard requirement of 100% uptime, is that realistic? No. So what are we going to chase? We say, well, we want 5 nines of uptime. And that sounds fantastic, great. But somebody has to be thinking in terms of how much work it is to achieve 5 nines of uptime. That is actually an extraordinarily hard thing to do at scale. Now, maybe with your system, 99.99, 4 nines is enough. In that case, you're talking about something on the order of, I would say, 1.5 days a year of outage, right? 5 nines would be something on the order of 3/4 of a day a year of outage. That's still, fantastic if you can reach it, but maybe that difference isn't critical to your organization. And maybe the work you're going to have to do to reach that extra 9 is more than your organization is willing to pay to get there. Maybe it is within the business viable to say, we're willing to give up a 9 in order to reach the market faster. And then maybe we can focus on that later. But we have the user stories and the epics around that work defined. And it's not technical debt, it's merely a prioritization exercise. The really important thing when you're working in an organization like this is understanding how groups are going to work together. And if you don't think about this, you're going to end up with churn and difficult conversations at the point when things are going wrong. Now, think about this. If you are building software over AWS or some other, cloud platform, Azure, name it, Google platform, you may have to build some critical infrastructure on top of that so that you can run your software in a specific way. You want to do things such as have immutable deployments, and you want to have infrastructure as code, all this good stuff. But then the software engineers who are building domain-specific software on top of that are then going to have to deploy on the infrastructure you created over that cloud platform. And if you haven't, as a group, figured out how to deal with an outage, a SEV, then you're going to have pain at the time when that SEV occurs because you don't know who does what. And that is critical. And not only that, you don't do it just one time. This is something you need to revisit every 6 months because it can change. It will change as you go through outages. It will change as you try deploying a new database for the very first time and it wasn't configured by the infrastructure team first in the way that you wanted, or you deployed with a specific application configuration that wasn't compatible with the way they deployed. Okay, whose responsibility is that? How are we going to attack those problems? Make sure this is crystal clear. If you don't, you will pay for it. And I've worked at organizations where we knew this going in, but we did not prioritize the work. We did not say, we're going to sit down and have these sessions because you know what? We're all focused on just trying to get this thing out the door. And we suffered as a result of it. Don't make the same mistakes. They are like the API of your team. They are the interfaces for the way the various parts of this organization will communicate and interact. So how do reactive product owners fit into a team that is building software? I mean, this is something that I have built over the last 10 years of building software. And I currently work in an organization where, believe it or not, if you say the word agile, people will come after you. They will, want to beat you up a little bit. Because, it's just not acceptable inside of Facebook to say something like Scrum or architects. We just don't have them. We focus on allowing teams to build software in the way that they want to, and engineers do decide what they want to focus on, what they want to work on for that half. And then at the end of the half, they have to show the impact that they delivered. It's a very unique environment. But this view of how to organize and structure teams, I have successfully used to roll out literally perfect projects using these technologies, Scala, Akka, Cassandra, Kafka, over AWS with infrastructure as code, with a platform as a service running over a cloud provider. All of that successfully with not a minute or second of downtime for the first 9 months it was up. And handling absolutely millions of users. So I'm very excited to show you what this is. First of all, we have to think about how we're going to communicate with the rest of the organization. And if you don't feel this is important, you're going to make a serious mistake. Everybody in the organization has to understand what you are doing. Somebody has to clearly define the mission of the project. You have to have that clearly written out so that your team can know that they are shooting for the right goals. Because if it isn't within that mission statement, as much as we all hate things like mission statements, but if you aren't doing something that fits into that mission statement, you are not successfully contributing to the project. And the product manager has to be the person who defines that. Ultimately, they are the person who is saying that we have built what we said we would build. And they are the ones interfacing with the rest of the organization to make sure that those customers are getting what they need, that their concerns are being represented. So these outward-facing roles are extremely important. I mentioned that Facebook doesn't have architects. We don't hire them. We don't look for them. And that means that somebody on the team has to be thinking in terms of how are all of these disparate systems going to work together. It doesn't matter that you have somebody specifically as an architect. It does matter that you have somebody at least fulfilling that role. Somebody who is going to arbitrate the communication patterns and ways that all of these disparate services are going to work together. Has to be somebody focused that way. And then we look inside the project, and we talk about a functional product owner. This is the person who typically is writing those epics in tools like Confluence. Those epics are very important for saying, this is a chunk of work we feel we can deliver. And it may not be in a sprint or in a very short period of time. Maybe it's something that gets broken up into multiple sprints because it's very large. Maybe the epics themselves are too large and actually need to be chunked up a little bit themselves. But they define the actual work. And one of the really interesting things that I found in the past was that I walked onto a project where there was a large consulting firm. They had not a lot of experience in building reactive software. But they had been chartered and brought in to do exactly that. And they were doing all the product work, and they were doing all the development work. And then I would, whenever I arrived, I asked people on the team. I started getting to know their engineers, and I had kind of interviews with them to make sure that they knew what they were doing. And I said to one person, hey, so what do you know about Akka? And they said, well, I've never used it, but I'm going to build my wedding website with it. And I looked at them funny. It's like, you don't really use Akka for that, but okay. You could use Akka HTTP and try and, I don't know. But it isn't what I would think of for using Akka, and so eventually we had to ask them to leave. But before we did, first of all, we had to start getting sensible requirements that we could actually work from. Because we had a whole ton of stuff that was in Confluence, and none of it was organized. And none of it made sense for anybody to take and actually do work from. So what were we going to do? I sat down and started calling a few good friends of mine. People like Duncan DeVore, Von Vernon. These are people who are very well known in the domain-driven design space. And I said, I got to do this quick. I don't know how to event storm. Has anybody here done event storming? Okay, a couple. It is amazing. So Duncan, Vaughn, a few other people gave me a helping hand in understanding what we were trying to accomplish with this, and I read as much as I could on the internet. I even arranged for training to come in, but unfortunately it wasn't going to be here. It wasn't like somebody could come in and give a training the next week or something like that. So we figured we may as well just get started. We got critical stakeholders in a room. We got about 9 or 10 people. A couple of key developers, a couple of architects, a couple of product people. People who really knew how the system was supposed to work, how it would have to integrate with other systems, and how it would have to be built. And we sat down and started doing event storming. The idea of an event occurring and certain behaviors resulting. You build boxes that represent a payment has occurred. What does that mean? You know, a credit card transaction came in. Okay, what do we have to do as a result of that? What are all of the systems that then have to be affected and updated as a result of that credit card transaction? Maybe in some cases you have to start tracking rewards points or something like that. Maybe you have to start creating all kinds of auditable logs or something like that that allow you to, audit your transaction history and stuff like that. But you start breaking it down because you have that big box, and then you break that down into smaller boxes, and you talk about the inputs, you say the results. Talk about the inputs, say the results. And by the end of a day, you have an extremely clear picture of what your requirements actually look like. I'm not kidding. One day. Now, I'm not saying that it's a good idea to put people in one room for one day, but we were pretty desperate and we had to get things turned around quick. It's a good idea to say, hey, we're going to do this over time. And later on, we were able to do that. Event storming became a critical part of the organization's ability to express itself. And functional product owners then become the owner of the outputs of that. They say, all right, we've got all these great Post-it notes. We see flows. We can now build epics that represent workflows that have to occur. And that's what the functional product owners do. The reactive product owners on the inside now have to start thinking about the non-functional concerns. Are we going to be able to build software that meets our requirements for resilience? Everybody's going to say they want 100% uptime. All right. Some people are going to say you need auto-scaling. Maybe you don't. You'd be surprised. If you have technologies such as Orleans or Akka that allow you to handle huge amounts of traffic in very small machines, believe it or not, you may not need to scale up as much as you think, and you're only going to find out through your own testing. It's important to have a test environment set up that is exactly like your production environment. And if you have infrastructure as code, you can stand one up pretty easily and run your tests. So the reactive product owner is the person who's focused on doing that kind of work, building the epics around that elasticity, reliability, performance, testing, all the things that otherwise people just assume someone's going to handle. And then you look at the product analysts. The product analysts are the people who then have to break down those epics into user stories. And some people say, well, user stories, I mean, who really finds that important? Does anybody here do behavior-driven development? Yeah, one. Okay. The idea here is that if I have user stories that are actually expressible as code, they themselves can be executed as tests to verify the behavior of the system. And you can automate that and make it part of your deployment process. In your continuous integration environment, you have your unit test execution. And then in your continuous deployment, you can have the execution of all of these integration tests, the behavior tests, the stress tests. Somebody has to be defining what those are at a lower level, and that's where the product analysts come in. They sit with a development team. They work closely with them to make sure that everybody understands what is being done. And at the end of a sprint, they are the ones who take what was delivered to the functional or reactive product owner and say, here it is. Did we do what we said we would do? And if so, and it's verifiable, they sign off, the functional and non-functional reactive product owners. Somebody's got to do that and say, yes, we accomplished what we thought. And if you have that, you have a level of accountability because nobody is going to want to sign off on something that you didn't prove. And then you have the ability to say for sure that you did something. And if you didn't do something, you can say what you didn't do and clearly express how you're going to approach that problem. And then the lead engineers, a tech lead or something like that. Every one of these pairings are people who have to work closely together. In the case of the product manager and architect, they are the outward-facing team. They should be working in concert to understand the requirements of the users, and while the architect is thinking about what that means for the integration. The functional product owner and the reactive product owner have to work together to prioritize the work of the team. And then the product analysts and the lead engineers are the leaders of the implementation. And they are obviously each on the development teams, right? You're going to have one of each of those on each development team. So they are really critical to making sure that the system is built exactly the way we want and that we're meeting all of our critical requirements. Now the real question becomes, who's going to do this? Who's going to be our reactive product owner? Who wants to? If I may, I'm going to digress for a little bit, and I hope that's all right. I'm going to tell a story. So at Facebook, we have, and this is all in a talk, by the way, Ben Christensen, who is very well known. He did RX Java, and he did Hystrix whenever he was at Netflix. He joined Facebook back in 2015, and for the first year, he was working on reactive sockets implementation that underpins our Thrift. Thrift is like protocol buffers inside of Facebook. And after he finished with that, he was asked to take on a really unique and hard project. Facebook can build data centers. We do that quite a bit. And not only that, we open source our data center designs because we have the greenest data centers in the world. We cannot run a cloud platform for someone because we just don't have room. We are growing so fast. There's so much going on in the world. We are trying to keep up. But our reality is also that we are not able to move jobs around fast enough. So if you look at our fleet, we have 80% of our fleet dedicated to specific teams doing specific work. And then 20% are jobs that are running in a shared space. And if you're running in a shared space, then you can say, hey, we're not doing something with that server right now. It's not being heavily taxed, so why don't we run some ML jobs there, right? Start trying to figure out, if this is fake news or something like that. But we only have 20% of that available to us. We need to invert that ratio. We need to get to 80% of a shared space. And we need to do a better job of how we move those things around. We are extremely involved in the open source projects around systemd. We're very involved in the open source projects around Btrfs. This is how we do our containerization at the lowest level on our boxes, so that we have a single process manager for how we run something that is going to be rock solid. And this is one of the areas where Docker can be a little bit challenged. So we don't want to use Docker. We want to focus on systemd. It's what we call native process management. And then Btrfs gives us the ability to, instead of downloading an entire image to every box every time we want to move jobs around, we can instead focus just on the diffs. If there are shared libraries and things that were already in use, already in the previous image, all we have to do is bring down the diff between them. And now our network is no longer quite as taxed. So Ben Christensen took this project on, and he started looking at the infrastructure we have. We have that containerization I was mentioning. We also have our own scheduling and orchestration. It's called Tupperware. And we haven't open sourced that. I'm not sure we feel like it's ready. We have significantly overhauled Tupperware, and I think it is a goal at some point for us to open source that, but we want it to reach the level where we're doing everything Ben is defining right now. And what my team does, while Ben is focused on that job portability, is we focus on data portability. We're thinking in terms of, all right, if jobs and tasks are moving around boxes and all this stuff is happening at the same time, how do we maintain that data locality? Because people subscribe to my project and say, I need to make sure that this data set is close to that task. And so we're the ones responsible for making sure that that is occurring. We do sharding as a service. And whenever I'm talking to people who aren't technical, I have to make sure I say that very clearly. We shard a lot of the data at Facebook. The primary goal for that is because we don't want every team to have to figure out their own sharding strategy. Wouldn't it be great if somebody was doing it for you, and then you just did the actual movements based upon Shard Manager telling you where and when? and then we update our service discovery layer so that whenever requests are coming through from the web servers, it's directed to the right places for the data. Ben took this on because, A, it's a super interesting project. He is an engineer, hands down. That is the way he wants to be thought of. But at the same time, he is playing the role of the technical program manager of our infrastructure as a service project. And he is defining all of that work that we are doing outside of the scheduling and orchestration, the resource brokering, which is going to be our source of truth for all of the infrastructure we have in our entire fleet, and the allocation layer, which is going to be responsible for trying to understand who does what where, then the actual scheduling of the jobs, the orchestration to make sure that we keep that number of instances up and running. And then Shard Manager is sitting there and saying, all right, hold on a second. Somebody wants to decommission a whole set of machines, or they want to run maintenance on a rack, or there's an outage that's occurred. Maybe a whole data center has gone down. I need to reorganize everything. I got to react to that immediately, despite whatever I was doing, and start moving stuff around so that we always keep data available to you. It's a very hard problem at scale. One of the fun things about it is that you can sit there and look at somebody's code and say, wow, that's really weird. Why did they do that? And inevitably, you come to a realization. They've been working at a scale that I've never worked at before, and that worked just fine. And you shouldn't make fun of that for any reason, because they are doing it and you're not. So it's wild. I think in some time, we ourselves would want to open source Shard Manager. But before we do, we have to sit down and completely rewrite our workflow engine, which is the one figuring out how to load balance and how to deal with all those prioritization changes, right? It's a big piece of code. It's 7 years old. It's C++. And we're going to do this in the next year. And in the meantime, we're talking to Google about their Slicer project. We're talking to Microsoft, who, on their Azure platform, they've got Cosmos DB and their Service Fabric, which does very much the same thing. Because we want to see how other people have approached this problem and make sure that we are taking the right considerations into account. And then we're going to start building it. And somebody's going to have to take on these product roles. To be honest, it's probably going to be me. I work in the production engineering side. Facebook engineering has two sides. There's software engineers, they typically build features, and then there's production engineers. People sometimes think that that is like a SRE, site reliability engineer, like at Google or Uber. It's not. Production engineers at Facebook are expected to code. We are expected to automate pain points. We may not be focused on the delivery of domain-specific features for what this project is, but we are the ones who are saying, if I have to do that more than one time, I should be automating that. And so those are the sorts of things we focus on. Our charter is around reliability, scalability, performance. And so, as somebody who likes the Reactive Manifesto, that was really attractive to me. And to be honest, I was looking for something that would be kind of out there and wild. And so I decided to take the plunge, and now I'm working in C++ again. Yeah. So what person should do this? Hiring about this is pretty difficult. It's not like you can go out there and find great product owners in the first place very easily. They're wonderful people to have on your team, and people try to hoard them as much as they can. Make sure that they stay on their teams because they're critical to your success. But whenever it comes to a reactive product owner, how many of these domain product owners are going to understand the concerns well enough to be able to write requirements around them? You can try to take a product owner and have them take these concerns. It may be easier for you to have an engineer who's willing to take a shot at this for a while, or maybe rotate your engineers through this role to have them focus on it. And you may find one who really enjoys it. Ben has told me that he is having the time of his life doing what he's doing. It is a hard challenge he's trying to solve at such a massive scale. Is he an engineer? Yes. But he is playing the role of a technical program manager and leading the project and talking directly with the highest levels of the organization as a result of it, because it's that critical to our success. And then when you talk about who is doing this, you can start looking around at other companies who are actually following this approach. Nike is one of them. Starbucks is another. If you search for these terms, Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever, you will find job recs for people who will do this sort of thing. And if it interests you, maybe you want to go work for Nike, maybe you should go work for Starbucks, because you're going to get to work in an incredible organization that's going to allow you to do amazing things. because they've adopted this mindset. So, treat reactive like a product. Think about it the same way you think about your domain concerns, and make sure you represent it and prioritize it exactly the same way. That will lead to successful projects. I've proven it. Any questions? Richard has a microphone, so if you have a question, make sure you wait for him to bring that to you.
You mentioned about the role of a product analyst in your slide. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, okay. So, product analysts, whenever they're working with a team, right, they are assigned to a specific, Agile team, Scrum team, Kanban team, whatever you want to call it, just a development team. And I really do believe it's a good idea to have a team that's no more than about 7 or 8 people, because otherwise it becomes unwieldy. One of those 7 or 8 should be the product analyst. And this is a really good question, because I'm realizing I forgot to mention a couple of interesting things. They're sitting with the team and making sure that as you start your sprint, the sprint planning is occurring. We're thinking in terms of what we're going to be doing over the next several iterations. And they're the ones who are sitting there and making sure the developers are building things with the right mindset. Are they thinking about the functional concerns that they should? On the technical side, the lead engineers are the ones who are responsible for that from the reactive and non-functional concerns. But the product analysts are thinking in terms of, I need to write a user story that expresses how this is going to work, this chunk of domain-specific behavior. And then the really cool thing, if you follow BDD, is those are actually executable tests in and of themselves. One of the things I did at a previous customer was I hired Bill Venners. Bill Venners, well known for Scala Test. And what we did was we had him and his team take the output of our product analysts and make that executable, so that we knew exactly what was described as the requirement for that work in that sprint, and we could take that directly into test. Now, some of the infrastructure and languages and the way you write are a little painful, but the benefit of it is obvious, because you can clearly state that you are meeting the goals for that sprint. So the product analysts are the ones who are thinking in terms of, what are the domain-specific work we have to deliver in this time frame, whatever that time frame is, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 4 weeks, depends on the team. Some teams do 1-week iterations, right? They're the ones who say, this is what we're going to do, make sure the team understands it, works with the team on a day-to-day basis, does the sprint planning with them so that they understand the epics. But then those product analysts also do have to make sure that they're working closely with that functional product owner. And you'll have one functional product owner maybe for 4 or even like 9 different development teams. So they'll have 9 different product analysts who are coming to them and discussing the epics and breaking them down into the user stories, right? That's their specific job. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And Bill did a heck of a job. I highly recommend his consultancy for helping you build out this kind of infrastructure. I mean, when we started on that particular project, we didn't have any infrastructure to draw from. It was not an organization that was used to building software, custom software from scratch. And so we had to build all of the processes, all of the infrastructure from the ground up. And Bill was really critical for doing that. So there's a little bit of an endorsement on my behalf for Bill and his consultancy. Any other questions?
Hi, thanks. Same slide. You said that with respect to architects, that you don't have them, you don't look for them, you don't hire them, et cetera, but somebody has to do the job. So how does that work? How do you find them? How do you mentor, and what do you call them?
Unofficially? Not so well. So I work in a group called Core Systems. And Core Systems at Facebook means Tupperware, which is that containerization and also the orchestration scheduling. We also have something called SMC, which is our service discovery layer, so that when requests come in, they find out where all the places they can go to find data or update a system or something like that. And then we have something called Service Router, which is going to be the one that says which of those places you definitely go to, right? You're given a list. It's the one that defines, does the load balancing and stuff like that. So we have all of these different disparate components in our core infrastructure, and we haven't focused enough on making sure that we're building them in a cohesive way. So when we think of like Microsoft and Service Fabric on Azure, this is a holistic approach to building, infrastructure that is going to underpin cloud-based applications. At least I assume so, because I'm not actually in Microsoft. But if we take a holistic approach, then we don't have to sit there and think quite as hard about, well, that's doing the same thing as this thing, so how do we negotiate that? Because we didn't think about it holistically. We need people who are thinking about it holistically. I think that as we move forward in our core systems roles at Facebook, we are taking this very seriously. And while we may not have architects by definition on the team, there will definitely be people playing that role. It's a valuable role. I know that we have all, maybe met one or two architects in our career who we were like, oh goodness, because they don't code, or they sit in a glass tower or something like that, and they're not in touch with what it really takes to implement something. But when you find a really great architect who does have those abilities, those are great people to have around. I love being able to work with people who do not take up many of my mental cycles. People who I know are going to go off and be able to do their job well. And I just don't have to think about it. Those are my favorite people to work with. And when you find an architect like that, it's just, it's heavenly. In my case, I know that I'm going to have to take on several of these roles for my team. I'm going to have to play that non-functional product owner. I'm going to have to think about the external concerns of an architect. And if you don't have these people in your organizations, at least think about what those roles are and make sure that somebody is at least representing them. Because it is critical to make sure that you understand how these systems are going to work together. Does that answer the question? Well, no, thank you. Okay. There was somebody over here.
Well, actually, it was mostly the same question. I was curious about the contradiction when you mentioned that architect is like, something you don't say over there at Facebook. But then there's like, a role that's important in this slide here. So I was just curious on hearing you about, elaborate on that, but that's fine, thanks.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other thing I was curious about is, can you elaborate a bit about like why Agile is like maybe also like a subject that people don't talk about?
Are you asking how does Facebook deal whenever they do not actually do Agile?
Yeah, and also the fact that you also said that each team is maybe like free to decide how they want to operate. So do they end up actually adopting Agile methodologies or similar things, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every team is free to do this themselves. I have seen one or two Kanban boards around the org. I haven't outed anybody. The reality for a team is it's critical for a team to understand how they are going to successfully deliver software. Whatever works for them. And I remember working at one organization where I had one team that wanted to do Kanban. And if you look at Kanban, you don't really have sprints per se, right? And then you have another team who wants to do Scrum. And that kind of disparity in approach does lead to some churn. Because somebody's got to be saying at some fixed points whether or not you are meeting your requirements as you move forward. In Facebook, we are given an awful lot of leeway to figure out how your individual team is going to operate. In my case, I'm working on a team that has a lot of software engineers and not so many production engineers. It's actually something we call a new engagement. Production engineers are brought into teams in order to help them take into account reliability and scalability and automation and performance and all of that, and monitoring and all the things around operationalizing the software. And as we're growing this team, it's going to be a continual process to make sure that we are comfortable with that dichotomy between developers just getting jobs done and us understanding, are we making the progress we need to deliver on our commitments for a half. So you would go from one team to another, and one of the really great things is you join Facebook, and the first 8 weeks that you're there, 7 weeks if you join in Menlo Park, 8 weeks in Seattle, you go through about 5 weeks of first onboarding, learning the different technologies, because a lot of it is internal. right? We do use Zookeeper, but we call it Zeus. A lot of the other infrastructure is stuff that, it's just Facebook specific. It was built back when nobody had an idea of how to do containerization or something like that, so we had to build our own. And then once you've, gone through that process, you get to pick a team. And you spend 1 week with one team that sounds really cool, and you spend 1 week with another team that sounds really cool. In my case, I spent 1 week with a team called Ads Product Platform, where we build out, the way that we serve ads. And then another week I spent with the Tupperware agent team, the containerization work. I spent a third week with a group in Messenger. It's real-time infrastructure that allows us to update all of the devices you have that are using Messenger that say that you read something. Like the terrible Twitter problem you have. You go from one machine to another and you don't remember where you left off, Being able to do that sort of stuff. I ended up wanting to go to infrastructure because I was so intrigued by what Ben did. To try and figure out how a team is going to work means buy-in. The team has to agree that this is how they want to work. And especially at a culture like Facebook, we call it bottoms up. The engineers define the work that they are going to take on. The engineers write out the plan for the strategy long term. It's not the managers who do that. It's not a product owner who does it. The engineers own it. And to work your way up in Facebook from level to level is really how much more of that kind of work you are doing. How much you are influencing your team, how much you are influencing the organization, how much you are influencing the world in its direction. And to do so, you get buy-in from your team. For my team, we are not doing sprints. I sit right with my team and I watch what they're doing as far as, not micromanaging, but I'm part of the process of their software development and I know how they're progressing in their work. It's not like I'm somebody sitting in an office on another floor who needs to come down and check and make sure that things are going the right way. At the same time, we have milestones, we have checkpoints. And we say, are we meeting our requirements? Now, the actual definition of those requirements and the writing up of them, that's me. That's my engineers working with me. If something is there, it is the engineers who have to do that, and then I'm the one who tries to help them figure out and prioritize that work, right? I'm doing a lot of different hats. But at Facebook, that's sort of how things work. And if I need something, I need somebody to come in and help us in a different dimension, I can go and say, I want to get another person on my team to do that. If I can find somebody willing to do it, they can come in and be that person, right? But it is unique. It's a different way of operating. It's non-structured, and every team can do it differently. For better or worse, right? That does mean that if you have integration points and stuff like that, those teams have to work closely together and know when and how they're going to deliver.
Thank you.
How are we doing for time?
A couple more questions.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sure you've seen the Spotify organizational model, and I was curious as to how you deal with communities of practice and career development.
Okay, so I actually haven't. I haven't actually seen the Spotify organizational model. Do you want me to try and answer the question anyway?
So they have this model that's designed as autonomous teams, but so it's loosely coupled but tightly aligned through the use of OKRs, both company OKRs and team-based OKRs. Yeah. They've also developed something they call guilds, which is our communities of practice for elevating that area of expertise.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about that in the Facebook context or with respect to this?
Yes. Well, either.
I think OKRs are a great way of expressing key requirements. I mean, they are very explicit and very short, right? And therefore, people can grasp them very carefully. They don't express nuance particularly well. So OKRs can be overarching goals and things that represent success of a project, and that's great. But you still have to have somebody dissecting those OKRs down into actual work that the team is going to build. And maybe that's what that guild, I think you called it, represents?
Those decisions are made at the team level, but they're also looking at career development. So all the product analysts get together as a guild and say,
I see a guild, right, okay. So what he just said was that these are done at the team level, and they're also part of the career development of people who are product analysts and stuff like that, working as a guild. That's interesting. How many people have heard of software craftsmanship? A lot. I went to the very first software craftsmanship, symposium in North America back in like 2009 or something like that. And I was this crazy guy because I was the only person in the room doing Scala, and they found me fascinating. At the time, I remember Uncle Bob standing up in the room and saying, we do not want to be a guild, right? We do not want to have somebody defining what is the successful criteria to become an expert, an actual software craftsman. Craftsperson is what I would prefer, he said, but I can't get him to change. Nonetheless, I'm not sure that that's the case in this particular scenario where the guild is saying they're defining, well, you are truly a product owner, but maybe they are defining who is doing the best work or something like that as a group. That is good. One of the difficult things in a lot of organizations is the promotion cycles can be a zero-sum game. And in so, when somebody gets money or title or whatever, it comes at the expense of other people. A fascinating part of Facebook is that that is not true yet, right? I don't know if maybe it's just we haven't reached the point as an organization where we're even thinking about it. But when we go through our review process and our promotion process and everything like that, it is never the case that we are saying, well, we can only do one person. And therefore, somebody's got to be a loser here, right? Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. It's an unfortunate reality for a lot of businesses out there that budget defines how we promote. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I really like what I see at Facebook because when we go through the review process, because it's not a zero-sum game, you don't have that internal discussion which can be really negative. And if anything, in my experience of watching it, it tends to lift people more. Because somebody will say, hey, that's a meets-all person. That's an anchor meets-all person who's doing exactly what we think they should be doing. But then we compare them to other people, and then we realize, hey, that person's actually doing a little bit more. They're elevating. They're actually maybe on the cusp of being an exceeds. And then as we start doing the people who are exceeding expectations, we realize, hey, that person there is actually doing the same thing as this person we thought was a meets-all. So that's how we're calibrating the delivery of impact, of engineering excellence, defining the actual work. I forgot the word. Direction. Impact, engineering excellence, direction, and also the people level. Like, are you helping mentor people? Are you helping do interviews? All that kind of stuff. These dimensions help craft that. It's a fascinating process to watch because it's not defined by, that we only have so many people we're going to promote. We have only so many people that we're going to give raises to or whatever, right? The level that you get as a result of your review is what you end up getting as your, bonus, your raise, your stock that you get. It's fascinating to watch. Does that answer the question? I feel like I've gone on a lot of different tangents, but I'm not sure I know enough about that guild to understand it and say how it would influence us or any other org. Yeah, is this a question back there? Or is that just somebody saying time?
Yeah. 1 minute.
Hi, thank you. So this sounds to me like you do quite a lot of decisions. So how do you document these decisions that when you come back maybe in a year or more and that start from scratch?
So at Facebook, we use a tool called Quip. Anybody here ever use Quip? Did you like it? No. So I can't talk an awful lot about this particular thing, but Zuckerberg gets up in front of the company every Friday and does a Q&A and answers all the questions people have, right? And before the actual meeting, somebody puts out like a survey. What questions does everybody have? What questions do you want to ask? And they can be really direct. They can be hard questions, and sometimes, he struggles with them because they can be difficult. But one of the questions that's almost always in the survey is, can we get Google Docs? Because we're using Quip. It's like trying to format things. It's so bad that I want to go back to using WordPerfect 5.1. When you could go into that one view and sit there and put all the tags in place to get things formatted exactly right. I can't do that in Quip, and it drives me bonkers. So we document things in Quip. We have to document what we're going to do for a half, what we're going to do over the next several years. What are our goals, right? What are our priorities, the things we're focused on? We have to prioritize them as P0s, P1s, P2s, etc. And that is our documentation. It's in Quip. It's hard to find. It's difficult. But this is the tooling that we use. And this is a reflection of an organization that grew from a really small startup into something massive extremely fast. You see that with Facebook a fair amount. I think that in a lot of cases, things that sound like, oh, Facebook did this thing, it's more like nobody knew. And nobody thought about it at the time, and boom, something happened, and nuts. It wasn't because people were trying to do something wrong. It's just the organization's growing so fast, so much is happening so quickly. Yeah, finding requirements and then leaning on those. You just have to keep a lot of bookmarks. It's not ideal.